Welcome to Church is Canceled.
Hello,
my
all.
name is Brett, and I am here with, it looks like Bubba this week. We're going with Bubba. What were we? We were like Zoltron last week, or
Zordon.
Zordon.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Danny, otherwise known as, I'll be referring to him as Danny,
Because that's my name.
not whatever ridiculous name he puts on the screen.
Right.
So this is Church is Canceled, the podcast where we discuss some of the most salacious church scandals in the history of the church, as well as church culture.
Yeah. The name is it's intended to be kind of flashy and in your face. And but my intention, I think our intention, I only ever speak for myself, is that I'm not here to aggrieve God or criticize the gospel. I'm just here for me, I have to poke fun at some of the stuff we do as Christians. I mean, we have to, if we can't develop a sense of humor for some of the stuff we do, and if we can't do that, that's why people walk out. If things are too rigid. But this week we're going to talk about the rise and fall of Mars Hill.
Well, we're talking about Mars Hill, and
right.
we will reference a podcast produced by Christianity Today called "The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill."
Dude, I
did, before we do get too far into that, I did want to say as well, this is our first topic episode.
That's right.
If you want to hear what this is all about, if you're confused, maybe go back to the first one, our intro, where we kind of talk about that. But like Danny was saying, we are in no way a ministry. We are not pastors. We do not intend to minister to you. There will likely be no healing provided through you listening to this. If there is, that's your own fault.
Well, I mean,
that's my disclaimer. And our legally,
legally, we are technically a not-for-profit church. But that's just for tax purposes. So that's not
right. We're obligated to give you that disclaimer at the beginning of every podcast. Our attorneys have informed us.
That's correct.
This is purely for entertainment purposes.
Correct.
If you get something out of it, if you find a piece of healing, we'd love to hear from you. You can email. We don't have an email address.
No, it's dgfl1836@gmail.com.
That's right. We do have an email. Okay.
So I will just say though, our podcast, our production schedule ended up getting pushed back 2 weeks. The first week we tried, we had tech problems. The second week I was going through just feeling grumpy.
The enemy had a hold of you. Would you say the enemy kind of had a hold of your heart?
No, I wouldn't say that at all. What I would say though is, just as I was just I was just off kilter for a little bit. Yeah. And then 2 weeks after that, we did our first episode. I felt great. I was on fire for the Lord. And then I proceeded to consume this 15-hour 12-part series from Christianity Today. And listen, I'll say at the outset of doing this podcast, some of my thought process was, well, if it was like, hey, there's a Venn diagram of girls in yoga pants that drive Suburbans and listen to, true crime podcasts. And there's another subsection of those people. They don't drive Suburbans. They drive minivans because they go to a mega church and they have 4 kids. And we could, do this long series. I listened to the whole thing and immediately was like, oh, we are never doing any of that. We're doing 1 episode, it's in and out, or maybe 2. But I'll tell you this much about Mark Driscoll, and I'll say this personally. Mark has been a part of my faith story. We can't pretend he was the first guy to really, kind of like President Obama, he was the first guy to really use the internet to do church the way he did. And, there's a lot of stuff in the podcast and other places about the scandal that he was too masculine. But let me tell you something. Up in my head, right? I want to be the kind of man that does a handful of things really well, because I don't think you can do everything. I think you can only do a few things. I want to love God, serve the kingdom. I want to love my family well, and I want to be at peace with all men. But the problem is, in my heart, it's an episode of The Sopranos, except the soundtrack is Limp Bizkit's Rollin', the remix with DMX. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, what you've got to do, Danny, is you've got to take what you want in your head, and that head knowledge,
right,
that has to become heart knowledge. You have to feel that within inside of your spirit.
1 second. Jeff Bezos, can I borrow a dick-shaped rocket so I can launch myself into the sun? Oh my goodness. No, but for me, when I left my parents' church and I started going to big mega churches or whatever, a lot of it was at that time Justin Bieber haircuts and skinny jeans and like this and I'll use Driscoll's language here. It was
well, let's back up 1 second before we get too into Driscoll and just talk about who he was and who Mars Hill was, right? Sure. A little bit of background. I mentioned Mars Hill and Driscoll this morning to a guy, and he didn't know who they were. So
incredible.
I don't think he goes to church. So we may have listeners who don't or just never really got that into it.
That guy sounds like he probably is like having a great day. So like
he's a pretty cool guy. So Mars Hill was a church, a multi-site megachurch. It was founded in 1996.
Right.
By Driscoll, Leaf Moy, and do you remember the other guy's name?
Mike Gunn.
Okay, Mike Gunn.
By the way, Leaf Moy passed away, I think, 2 weeks ago. So
Oh wow.
Rest in peace to him, and he was only 60 years old.
Leaf.
Yeah.
Wow.
Seemed like a good dude. A man that Mark Driscoll called his pastor. He referred to him at some point as his pastor. So.
Well, Mark Driscoll was known. He kind of came to fame for having this style. That was, it was a mega church in the middle of Seattle, right? So a very unchurched place, not very conservative, but he was very conservative, at least in his theology.
Oh, yeah.
And he did not pull any punches. He had this I don't give an F attitude. He was very boisterous. He was very loud. He would yell. He would preach for over an hour sometimes. He would yell at the people in his congregation and tell them to be better, which is kind of how he became famous.
And what I find fascinating about that is you and I planted a church in a blue city. It's Austin's
city, yeah.
Yeah, Austin's often referred to as the blueberry in the tomato soup. And we helped plant a church there, and that church took some kind of more progressive positions on things.
Right.
And it just didn't amount to in terms of size. I'm not saying that people didn't go there and meet Jesus and I'm just saying, and it's fascinating to see that in such a progressive city, and especially, Mark Driscoll is what we call a Calvinist, or at that time he would say
he was. He's come off that belief.
He's more of a prosperity preacher now. I think
a little bit. Yep.
I'm just kidding. He's not. But to have such a rigid theology in a city that I would say reject that kind of thing.
That type of conservatism. Yeah.
Yeah.
You would think he was doomed. You would think that this is his setup for failure.
Right. And I'll say this at the outset, like, I know that people got hurt by this, and I listened to the whole thing, and I think both of us went into doing this episode thinking it was going to be a big nothing burger.
Yeah. When I read about Driscoll and Mars Hill online, I'll read to you what I found. That at the end of September 2014, the church elders did an investigation, and they found that he had patterns of bullying, I'm doing air quotes if you're listening, not watching, and patterns of persistent sinful behavior. And they found him to be quick-tempered, arrogant, and domineering. And I thought when I read that, who gives a shit? What's the problem?
Yeah, I don't so what you've just described to me, I would say is, so the head of a massive church, I think at one point in time, they said they were 10,000, like 6,000 members, 10 to 12,000 attendees. He has a bit of an ego and he's a man.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But listening to the podcast that Christianity Today put out, the rise and fall of Mars Hill, I only got about 5 episodes in. I know you listened to the whole thing.
I did.
You really start to learn a little bit more about why this was such a big deal.
And let me just say this regarding the podcast. I look at following Jesus as an adventure that I'm excited that I get to go on every day. Listening to this podcast made me want to give myself a root canal with a rusty Amish drill bit. It was so like, this is an aesthetic thing, so I'm not saying anything about the host.
I
Okay,
like the way it was assembled.
Listen, I am a
I
champion.
hated the host's voice. It sounded
Yeah.
like he was trying to eat a bowl of cereal while he was speaking.
Here's the thing. I looked this guy up on Twitter. I listened to the podcast. I'm sure he's a lovely guy. I'm sure if we met, we'd be friends. But I feel like he lives in a intentional community with tiny houses. He makes his own kombucha. He rides a fixie. We're just not the same guy, right? Like a
Everything
fixie
you
is
just said, 100% agree. Yeah.
a fixie is a bicycle without any gears, and it's supposedly it's the hippie way. And also, let me just say this much about the way it was assembled. Listening to it was like reading the parts of the Old Testament where it talks about lineage, where it's like, and the son of Zebedee went into the mountain. And it's like, if you could just, like, you did this huge podcast, they clearly spent a decent amount of money producing it. Could you not at least have given me, here's a picture of this individual I'm talking about? They jump back and forth through the timeline as you do, like, because that's the way they did it. It's not that was a bad choice. Hey, could you just give me a timeline and like a visual? Because I did the whole thing on YouTube.
Oh, you watched it. I just listened on
There's nothing to see on YouTube. It's just a graphic with an audio wave playing. So like,
okay, well,
yeah, so I just did it because like I was watching it on my computer during work and then switching to my phone, like going to the gym or whatever. It was just the easiest way was to do it on YouTube because it will keep my place. But that's my beef with the podcast. The content, like to get like I felt so bummed out after watching or listening to this. I had to watch all of the Left Behind movies, including the Nicolas Cage, Chad Michael Murray reboot, just to get it out of my system and just to like be spiritually ready to talk about it today. So I had to listen to all of Jesus Freak, the DC Talk album, just to like.
So, all right. So bullying, patterns of persistent sinful behavior. He's quick-tempered, arrogant, domineering.
Yeah.
Danny, what did you hear more specifically in the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill podcast, which includes audio clips of Driscoll preaching, which includes interviews with people who knew him intimately? What did you hear that made you feel like you had to watch the whole Left Behind series, including the Nick Cage one, which we don't even talk about Nick Cage right now.
No. So there's parts of it that I heard that horrified me. And some of it was like, I'm not really offended by I'm not a complementarian. That didn't bother me. It didn't, like when he was like,
you're not a complementarian.
I'm not a macro let me put it this way. I'm a libertarian in all things, including following Jesus. And I think there are some people who are going to have complementarian homes. There's some people who are going to have egalitarian homes. It's not my place to tell them how to organize their house.
To define that for listeners who don't know, complementarian, you would believe that the husband plays a very specific role based on kind of traditional gender roles, and the wife plays another role. Egalitarianism would say it doesn't really matter who does what. If she goes out and earns more money than me, and I'm a guy and I stay at home and raise a kid, who cares?
Now, I think we have an episode in our call sheet that's going to be about men in the church. And so there's a lot of thoughts I have there. I'll save it for that because we have an whole episode dedicated to it. But I will say that as a practical matter, personally, I would much rather have a complementarian home. And I would say that at least for the period where we have small children, that's what makes sense. Like that's the kind of household I was raised in. But to say the reason I don't embrace the label complementarian is, I mean, I don't care if somebody's like, my wife is a doctor, so I stay at home with my kids. Like the man is at home with
because that makes sense to me.
So like, I don't think that so I think that rigid structure, I think can, so, but here's the answer to the question. There was like the very popular pastor of their downtown campus who was like, yeah, I'm not playing the video where you ask for extra donations because it's like, these are poor people who don't need to hear that or whatever. So he was super popular. When he left the church, they made him, he refused to sign a non-disclosure agreement.
Not Mark Driscoll, some other guy.
Yeah. This very popular pastor, Mark Driscoll, said you have to sign within the Mars Hill community this NDA, and me knowing that Mark Driscoll knows the Bible, I go, there's a whole verse about how what you do in the dark will be exposed to the light or something. Yeah. So like, you think this piece of paper is going to stop?
Is going to stop the Holy Spirit?
You think a piece of paper is going to stop a move of God? I don't think so.
Yeah.
That's one thing. He also said if that guy plants a church, and they someone said they heard him say this firsthand, so I probably believe it. If he goes and plants a church, I will tear it down brick by brick. Come on.
Yeah, that's what Driscoll said about someone else planting a church. Yeah.
One of his. Yeah. And, throughout the time, throughout the time there, it sounded like, at some point they had 85% staff turnover. The way they so
these are some of the things that caused it to be a scandal. 85% staff turnover. When he went under investigation and they announced that they're kind of splitting up their campuses, attendance dropped by almost 40%. One of the guys in the Christianity Today podcast who was there says, as soon as they realized that they were losing Mark, like they knew they were done.
Yeah.
Like that was it.
And that, to me, what kind of aggrieved me is I listened to the whole thing, and as someone who has, and I mean this sincerely, been impacted by his ministry, I would say I was impacted by the ministry of Mars Hill, because you listen to this and you find out like the reason he looks so good on stage was that they hired this super professional media guy and basically said, do whatever you want. He's like, he owned three. He's like, I bought 3 red cameras, which are these like $10,000-$15,000 cameras. And he said, we had 3 of them. NBC had 2 total. Like the entirety of that media conglomerate had 2 of them. We had 3 at a church. And like, to go into a city like Seattle, to build such a large church and sincerely unchurched people, it's not like where we come from, where it's like, yeah, I was raised Lutheran and confirmed, and then I went to an AG church and I really found Jesus. I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but I'm just saying, and the other thing too was like, when I found out like that there's a very popular clip, and you can find it online, where he starts yelling and he's looking, and you can tell he's looking at the camera and he goes, how dare you?
Yeah, let's timeline it up to the how dare you, because one thing that bothered you about the Christianity Today is they didn't timeline it. So let's timeline it up. He starts his church in 96. Correct. I don't have all the dates of when things happen, but it starts to grow pretty quickly.
Very
quickly. We said, kind of surprisingly, because he's very conservative and unashamed about being conservative in a very liberal city.
Right.
He ends up with multiple campuses.
Correct.
Starting to gain some fame. People like his style. He's very loud. He yells.
Let me interject this. They would say on an average weekend, they might have 1,000+ people come through the campuses, but he was just at the right place at the right time. One of their guys who was helping, just a volunteer, had a meeting with Apple, and Apple said, hey, we're launching a video iPod, an iPod that does video. And so he goes to Mark and says, hey, we should start putting our podcasts online. Have you ever heard of these, or your messages online? Have you ever heard of this thing called an MP3? So what they ended up saying is at the end, he ends up getting 10,000 downloads a sermon, which is huge.
That's wild.
Yeah.
So he's doing that, reaching a ton of people. Always kind of has this don't give an F attitude. So when he starts to get pushback from people for not liking his theology or his style or whatever, his solution is to just kind of fire them. Yep. There's a clip on the Christianity Today podcast where he's saying they're on the bus. And he says there's a few different kinds of people on the bus. There are people on the bus who want to get in the way, and we're going to run them over with the bus.
Right.
There are people on the bus who want to help and are going to help get us where we need to go. We want those people. And there are people on the bus who aren't really going to do anything, and we just want them to sit there and shut up because they're okay. They're not against us. They're not with us. Just sit there and shut up, and we'll allow you to stay on the bus. So to hear a pastor say those types of things about the people who are coming to your church and oftentimes giving 10% or more of their income to you and your organization that, if they don't do what you want, just going to run them over.
Right.
It's a metaphor, but that's how he dealt with things. He just started getting rid of people. There's one clip of him bragging about, he's like, I love it. I just fired 3 people before I came here.
Yeah.
This is a regular thing, apparently.
So, also that we should include in here is that, I listened to the whole podcast and with an expectation that I was going to come out on the other side of it going, this is a nothing burger. How did you squeeze, 12 episodes out of this one scandal? It turned out, but, in additional, so that bus comment was actually made at a conference where he was preaching about church planting. The major thing too is this dude, it's incalculable, I think, to understand how his impact when he created Acts 29, which is a Reformed theology church planting network, it's huge. Like there are so many. I mean, we
cannot. All over the country.
It's all over the world, right? And so ultimately he gets, they end up booting him, and all that's at the end, though,
Mm-hmm. So we got up to the point where he has his clip that went viral.
Yeah.
Right. Do you know what year that was? I don't have it.
I think it was 2009. And the part that
2009. He has do you want to say what he says in the clip?
Basically, like, and probably
he was infamous. A little background, a little context. He was very well known for being really hard on the men in his church, and he had a tough love kind of way of doing this. Like, you need to be better. You're a piece of poo. You can't just sit there and play video games and jerk off. Like, you got to be better if you're going to lead an army against the armies of hell, right? So this is a kind of a common thing for him to do, to talk to men this way.
Right.
But he did this.
And I find this really appealing. So he's yelling, right? He's saying something like, and you're dating your girlfriend and you're not marrying her or whatever. And he goes, how dare you? And the reason I'm not yelling that is because my microphone will peak and you won't hear anything. And he's screaming, how dare you? How dare you? And here's the part that really, like, it's like I saw the behind the curtain for a minute, because that clip was viral.
Mm-hmm.
And this was when you could actually go viral back then, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about catching a special flu. I'm saying, like, you literally went. He did it. Everybody thought this was just
off the cuff.
And
he claimed it was. He said, well, I just kind of make things up as I go.
Yeah. He did it in all 5 services.
All 5 services that day. Yep.
He located the camera, and shortly after that, Tyndale House gave him a deal for books. He got a book deal.
Yep.
So here's the problem, right? When I say, in my head, I want to be following Jesus and living the gospel and all that, but in my heart is an episode of The Sopranos. I like that. Like, I like the fact that he was that devious to, like, I'm going to put on a show here at church. I'm going to turn it into a book deal. And at the end of this, by the way, there's the episode 12, which is, so episode 11, the church is done. Episode 12, they talk about how they had to whack up all the money because there was like $20 million or something in their budget. They had to whack all that money up. So they had to pay him a year's salary, $600,000. Okay. And here, I don't have a problem. Seattle's an expensive place to live. So if I heard they were giving him $250, I would still be like, hey man, Seattle's expensive. He has 5 kids. Like, I don't believe in impoverishing our full-time workers, people who are doing ministry full-time. I don't believe that they should be impoverished because
it's an exhausting job.
Yeah, it's an important job. They should do it. But $600K, but I don't even care that he was making $600K. That's not the part that offends me. It's that on his way to making $600K, the way he got to that place of prominence and influence was by using his pulpit to step on other pastors. Like, there was a point where he put Joel Osteen on a screen in his church, took a clip from Joel Osteen and criticized Joel Osteen. And when his whole thing collapsed, he called up Lakewood to say, I'm sorry. And someone on Osteen's staff says, he forgives you. And And then Osteen sped off in his, Rolls Royce or whatever, which I'm not aggrieved that he owns. But I'm just saying, like, it's the hypocrisy, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you go to your congregation and you say you can have $1 million because of Jesus, I'm not offended that you have, like Stephen Furtick. I don't care that he has a $12 million parsonage that's tax free. God bless America, but or it's 12,000 square feet. I don't know how much money it is, but whatever. I don't care. And I will just say this also about Mark Driscoll. This is a prediction. This is a prophecy for the future. I think this man will pass down we'll get to the part where he leaves and starts in church. Mm-hmm. He's going to pass down his church to his kids, and he's going to run for Senate in Phoenix. He is going to be an American senator from Phoenix. 2025, Kristen Sinema will be up for re-election. I'm prophesying. I'm not prophesying. I'm just saying I'm predicting based on a gut feeling that's what's going to end up happening.
Well, interesting prediction. Always appreciated. Because you bring up politics, I want to talk about, and I thought this about him before they mentioned it in the podcast.
Okay.
I thought as I heard him speak.
Continue. Yeah.
That I just thought this guy has a style of speaking and addressing issues, a little bit of a Donald Trump style, which is what I think a part of a reason why a lot of people voted for Trump is he was funny. He didn't care about the institution of politics. He was going to say what he thought. Driscoll kind of did the same thing. He was funny. He was loud. He didn't care about the institution of the church and how he had to be polite and dance around certain sensitive issues. He said what he wanted to say. Now they liken him to Donald Trump later and say that he gave Donald Trump the playbook, which I don't know how much of that is true, but I could definitely see the similarities between the two and how that was appealing and attractive to people. Something fresh and hadn't been done before. I thought it was hilarious when Trump got up there on stage and started just making fun of his debate opponent. Like, he wasn't going to debate the right way. He's just going to make fun of him. That's what Driscoll did. He just made fun of other preachers.
He made fun of the Mormons. I mean, he made fun of keyboard warriors. He used to call them the Pajama Hadin, like the Mujahideen, but the Pajama. Like
he said some funny stuff, dude. He
cannot.
And he said he always used to complain about church being too feminine, saying, you walk in, there's all these pastel colors, and they're singing love songs to some sky fairy. And no joke, Danny, I walked into church this morning. They're singing some song that it's too high pitched. My voice won't even go that high. The octave just doesn't work. They've got pink lights on behind these two dudes in jeans that are tighter than my sister would fit into. And I'm just thinking Driscoll was right.
No, you're entirely correct that he was entirely correct. And that one, there's a clip of him, and you were glossing over a lot of stuff, but there's a 12-part, 15-hour series if you want to get into the details. But he became this kind of stalwart for New Calvinism. He was at Gospel Coalition, Acts 29. Like he was everywhere. And there's this clip from Desiring God, which is John Piper, so from our hometown. And I believe John Piper is a wonderful preacher. He probably has a wonderful church. He's an amazing minister. But anytime I hear him, my brain just goes, nope. But there's this clip of Driscoll that I still love, and I can't find the original one. So, but he goes, you walk into church and it's chickified Jesus, and he's wearing sandals and all this other stuff. And here's this guy who's wearing a puka shell necklace and an Affliction t-shirt with this mega church.
Driscoll,
and he's Driscoll. Yeah. And, and then you have Piper, whose hair is never combed, but he looks like Einstein.
He does.
And I'm just saying, for the love of Jesus, can we get this guy a hairbrush? But I'm just saying, Driscoll said that, and it really resonated with me because I can't tell you countless churches and, church communities that I was a part of and here's the other thing, like, I'm a chameleon. I can go to any of these places. I can fit in. That scares me. I know that I can walk in and I can put on the mask and I can say the words that they want me to say, and I can be the guy. I can tuck my polo shirt into my khakis, into my khaki shorts that my wife bought from
Yep.
Costco, and I can be the guy. But then the only problem with that is I'm not going to be the guy. I'm just going to be like some amalgam of whatever.
Just another guy.
I won't be the guy God made me to be, I think. Anyways, I'm going to be some fake thing that because I'm working to conform myself to the image of the church. But and the other thing that I heard that Driscoll would do throughout this podcast and other stuff was he would take staff and start pitting them against each other. And he would say, hey, so and so thinks you can't, to make them be more productive. That's fascinating to me that he would do that. That's
kind of like that's a Peter Schiff.
Yeah.
Type of strategy. That's like Schiff is known for, like, if you work for his company, they write your like top 3 negative things about you instead of your strengths, and they put it on your profile so everyone in the company can see, like, this guy wastes a lot of time and stuff. And the point of why they do it is to try to like get people to be better. But
no, and so like that part of it to me was like, and listen, I know what it's like to go into a church and so like and to be like made into a pariah. I know what that is like, right? But for me, the thing that was like, I guess I was lucky, and if you want to use this word privilege, I think it's a dumb word. I don't think it, but I'm just saying, I was raised by a loving family who loved Jesus, and the church that I was raised in when I was a very young child was in my grandfather's basement. And I got to see, and it's because it's your cousins and your aunts, there was a certain amount there was love, and we all took care of each other, and they're all immigrants. So it's like, we are all living the gospel. We're all living like we're in Acts, basically. Like if my uncle needed to borrow a car, like we just had to walk to my grandparents' house because my uncle borrowed the car. It wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
And so when I go into these churches, because I thought it was so the guy yelled at you, who cares? But I realized like for some people, they didn't have a dad. They didn't have this loving, they didn't grow up that way. So for them, this was it. This was their family. And this guy was being mean to them. Daddy was being rude. So that part I really do get.
Yeah. I think also to go back to his joke about you walk in, it's all pastel colors and
right.
they're singing love songs to a sky fairy. He was known for talking a lot about masculinity and calling men in the church and in his church to be more masculine. And masculine as kind of defined by traditional gender roles, like the man,
protector, provider.
He's the protector, the provider. He is the leader. Headship, ideas of headship were there. He's the head of the family. You do what he says.
Right.
So that was one thing he was known for, which I'm not particularly a fan of. But what struck me was the way that he did this. And I guess we could talk a little bit more about what he said about sexuality, but there were like side by side hypocrisies in the way that he would talk about things. So in one way he would say, with his views on masculinity on a whole, I agree. The church is, I think, rather, it's a feminine experience. But I don't
it's a feminine institution. And I'll just say this much. Like I said, we're going to have an episode on this, so I don't want to dive too deep into the woods. But there are women who left this church. They're completely aggrieved. They went and, now there's a more progressive church that's in their main building now. And their teenage sons are right now on Rumble listening to Andrew Tate. And they're listen, I go to the gym. I've been going to the same gym for a long time. One thing I can tell you, for a decade, I was always the youngest person in the gym. I'm now seeing, boys as young as 10 or 12 in the gym, and they're like, hey, can I borrow some extra, like, do you have any pre-workout? Like they are, I love to see it. I love to see young boys being toxic in quotes.
Toxic masculinity in quotes.
Yeah, and I'd say it this way: toxic masculinity in quotes. All they're doing is the exact same thing culturally. I'm not talking about church in this specific instance. Mm-hmm. Girl power. They're just doing boy power, but it's now toxic because they're doing it. And it's I believe in empowerment in that regard for the boys. And I'm just going to say this much. Driscoll was so correct about this. And the church the church writ large did nothing about it, that I believe we're going to have a generation of young men who love Jesus, and they're going to go be Catholic, they're going to go be Orthodox, they're going to leave mainline Protestantism because it became this hyper feminized experience that on some level denigrated their capacity to grow as young men. I shouldn't say denigrated, it diminished their capacity to grow as young men, diminished their capacity to grow spiritually, and then said, hey, if you just want something biologically because it's hardwired into you to like something, like I find odd is that the same people who are like, we should be against what's the therapy where you pray for people, they pray away the gay? Conversion therapy. Yeah, conversion therapy. I think within the context of mainline evangelical churches, we are doing conversion therapy on boys. And like, there's like, Jesus was so kind and compassionate. You can be kind and compassionate and you can care about people. The most rough dudes I know that are yoked and they drive trucks and they're like, they're not faking it. Because I know guys like that who are also faking it. We know one of those people. I shouldn't say faking it. They're wearing a costume. Yeah. It's not authentic to who they are. I know men who are authentic, like men. They hunt, they fish, they can gun a mule deer. Okay, they bow hunt. These aren't like, it's not a joke to go bow hunting, right? Because like anybody can crack something with it. But what I'm getting at is those men tend to have kind, gentler sides. They take fantastic care of their wives. They raise amazing daughters. So like that perception of like, if you're being pro masculinity, you're being pro wife beating, and this equivalency that's been created is where the church has accepted something from the culture, a lie from culture, and has adopted it as a fact, and then we're doing conversion therapy on boys to be like, hey, don't grow up to be big and strong. Instead, consume lots of soy, write a fixie, and live in an intentional community in a tiny house and make your own kombucha.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I think the overall, the experience is, I've seen the same thing in the church.
Right.
It just seems to be feminized. Now, the way that Driscoll handled it was interesting. I don't think you make men out of boys by yelling at them and making fun of them and just generally condemning them and telling them they're pieces of garbage.
I do think it on some level, like, so my friends, like you're one of my friends, and you'll call me up and fat shame me. And that does motivate me to get into the gym. I
just randomly call you and fat shame you. Because you make fat jokes about yourself, I will occasionally drop one on you.
It doesn't hurt my feelings. Do it. Oh, there is something that I did want to say. Like, I listened to this whole thing, and I meant to say this at the beginning of the show. And, as I said, I had an off week, so we lost a week there. I literally called my therapist and said, here's how I'm feeling. I listened to this whole podcast. And he said, hold on, I have the message here. Mm-hmm. He said that it sounds like you are suffering from something called empathy. I don't know what that is, but it's awful.
Empathy.
Oh, is that what that is? What, I asked him if he had any prescriptions or something that he could give me to help with my.
Rid of that,
yeah.
You don't want it to be empathy.
No. So he suggested I take a bunch of testosterone supplements, and they are working. I just doubled the dose just to help me get through it, and my jaw barely moving right now. I'm tweaking.
So I think the thing about what Driscoll did is he criticized men for being abusers and taking advantage of women. But this phrase stuck out to me from the Christianity Today podcast. I don't know who said it, but they said it seemed like the way that Driscoll did it was like the only way to protect a woman from being subjugated and abused by a bad man is to subjugate her to a good man, right? And that was his strategy. And that was from the female perspective. And you heard from women who were there, they said, well, like, where does it leave the woman? Just completely out of the picture. So he and I think truly did not like the abuse of women, but his solution to it was to focus so much on men that women in his church were just basically neglected.
And they give these anecdotes of, like, there's women who are abandoned by their husbands, single mothers. They would call him up and say, I need help, and he would drop everything and go help them.
Yeah.
There was even an anecdote in there about the media guy, and he's like, he had been dating a girl for 8 years, and Driscoll said, like, kind of joking, like, when are you going to marry her? And he's like, I don't have money for a ring, all this and that. And so he had just preached at, like, a youth group, and they paid him money, an honorarium.
All his money.
He just hands it to the guy and says, go buy a ring and get married. And he did. And that guy's still married. Yeah. So
I was really struck by all those stories about the incredibly kind things that Driscoll did for people. He let them live in his house rent free. There was one woman who, I think her husband, something happened to him medically, a health issue. And he's like, well, just come over and spend the night with us, and like made her tea, and just like he took care of people when they needed it, and he was willing to.
He put rum in the tea, though, like that. She said
he wasn't trying to drug her.
No,
he was just trying to calm her down. And he said, "Yeah, some rum in your tea." And but I was struck by the stories of kindness and the way that he did show the love of God to people, and I think that's something that we're going to continually see throughout our podcast series, Churches Canceled, that, people, they have scandals and they make bad decisions. They're kind of assholes in the case of Mark Driscoll, but they can also be really kind and loving people at certain times. And that's like, I don't believe people are all good or all evil, born good, anything like that. I think everyone has the capacity to be either one. And I think if we could see things that way, like even our church leaders, they have the capacity to do good things just like they can do bad things, maybe help perspective on these scandals and things that happen, so we're not so devastated when a church like Mars Hill falls apart.
Yeah, and I'll say this much, like, I know that at the end of the CT series, they say, like, basically there's two groups of people that, there's people who want to say it was all good. Let's just look at the impact he's had on spreading the gospel. And then there's another group of people who want to say he's all bad, and or that the whole situation was all bad. But let me just add this thing. There is a young man out there, 19, 20 years old. He's going to SEM. He's going to Bible college. He has it in him to be a prolific preacher, a prolific messenger of the gospel. And he's going to listen to that podcast. He's going to look at the history of Mars Hill, and he's going to go slow. He's going to take his time. He's going to be patient. He's going to surround himself with good, elders, older men. He's going to do, and he's going to reach hundreds of thousands of people. I'm not prophesying. I'm just saying I believe this.
Yeah.
And so I know that it's difficult when you have gone through turmoil. And throughout this podcast, they use a lot of progressive therapy phrases like trauma and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And they also use
it's real. I think it's a real thing.
I think it's a real thing, but I think there is an element to which we tend to make things in the realm of church and spirituality. We have inherited something from the me generation, the baby boomers, where we tend to make it all about ourselves. The whole point of the gospel is that it's about other people. And I think you have a tattoo right here that says, so that others may live. I think
others may live forever. That's
a little intense, but like, I don't know about that, but but I'm just saying that, I think my takeaway from it was, this was rough and people got hammered. And like, when we say that he hammered the guys, he, like, at one point called a all men's meeting at their one campus on a Saturday morning and just spent 2 hours berating them. And to that, I will just say this much. One of my favorite shows is called Community. It's about a community college, and there's an episode where like a app comes to launch on the campus. It's like a social credit score app, and at the end of the episode, this whole like it was all this. It's a comedy show, right? It's a funny show, a sitcom as they say. But like at the end of the show, the guy goes, he's wearing like these weird outfits, and there's all this turmoil and revolution on the campus, and he goes, it's a Saturday, right? You guys can just leave. There's no classes today. You don't have to be here. And I know this sounds like an easy solution, and I've done this before, like with the church that we planted, that you and I were on their team. We helped plant that church in Austin. And it really hurt my feelings. I was really sad that I had to leave. But of course, I wasn't there for like a decade, so it's different. Like I wasn't. My entire life wasn't rooted in this community. It kind of was.
Understand how if you're part of a community that intense, that you have experiences where your pastor is letting you live in their basement, which I did. I lived in with the associate pastor of the church that we planted for like 6 weeks. So I kind of know what it's like and how that builds loyalty. But then I can only imagine for being a part of something like that, a community like that for years, and then you find out, this guy's been just accusing people of heresy.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And
no, but that's the part that really tore me up inside, was that I was not enthused by the fact that he was being a dick to people, but I can accept that as a reality because we're all humans. The part I couldn't deal with, I can deal with it, but I'm just saying it's easy for us to criticize. We're thousands of miles away, a decade removed from the whole story. But was how much of the accusations he would level at people. And the other thing that they encouraged was, if someone from the church was fired or they left the church, they were to be treated as apostates, which I'm totally against that, right? If somebody that I know does something that goes against what I believe is God's will for people, my first reaction isn't, well, you're getting disfellowshipped. Like, and I'll say this much. I know, I don't want to give too many details because it's somebody else's life and it's their story, but I know somebody in my community who came flying out of the closet because they were getting engaged to somebody of the same gender, and they just, and I don't know anything about what happened before that, but this person had always been kind to me. They had loved me well, and they had, beyond, I think, how they understand, served and protected me from bad, dark thoughts and all that kind of thing. So I texted this person, and in the spirit of the Bible verse, I forget the citation, mourn with those who are mourning, celebrate with those who are celebrating. I wasn't endorsing any sort of particular behaviors or taking a theological position. I just texted them to say, I saw that you got engaged. Happy for you. Congratulations. And the reaction I got from my dad, who this person is like a distant relative of mine, fourth cousin maybe, was, why would you say that? This person is like condemned to hell now. I was like, this is not the and I don't have any agenda for this person other than, like, they still are professing Jesus. If somebody professes Jesus, my rule is they're Christian, and and I have no room to judge what's happening, and I'm not trying to tell anybody how to live their life. But I did knowing my family, knowing my community, that this person's entire life just blew up, like completely immolated. They, got probably, I'm assuming, I don't know, they probably got booted out of their church. I doubt any of their cousins talk to this person anymore. I don't know. I'm just saying. And I thought, geez, that's whatever you want to say about the behavior is one thing, but to lose your family and your community and everything like this, and and the other thing too is, he wouldn't give people severance. One of the pastors who ended up leaving,
Driscoll,
so Driscoll was withholding severance from people who would not sign non-disclosures and non-competes. Dude, we're not a business. We're not supposed to be a business that we're competing. And the funny thing is, in his new church that he's planted, that he started.
Church in Arizona. Somewhere.
Scottsdale. Yep. He is down the street from the Overseer Church, which is from Dallas, Gateway Church.
Yes.
And he said this specific quote, and I listened to all of the Elephant Room series to like get prepped for this. So I really dove deep into the psyche of Mark Driscoll as much as you can from afar. And he said, we're down the street from you. Wouldn't this be competition? And the pastor of that church goes, no, we're all doing the same thing, right?
Yeah.
There's room for everybody. So that guy, and it's easy to be like, well, he went through a hard time and then matured. This was like 8 months later after saying, not 8 months, like 18 months more like, where he said, if that guy quits and plants a church within 75 miles of Seattle or any of our campuses, like he has to sign this before he's going to get his severance.
Yeah.
But what's impressive about the community was he declined to sign the documents, and it was maybe another person. They declined to. What's that?
Who declined to sign the documents?
One of the elders that he fired, or one of the pastors, one of the campus pastors that he fired, declined. Correct.
Yeah.
Declined to sign the non-disclosure, non-compete. So the church withheld their severance, and it was like, he has a family, and because he listened to what Driscoll said. He got married, had a bunch of kids, bought a house. Now he has these things called bills, and he has to pay them. And Driscoll just took away his salary. The community put out a GoFundMe and raised a little over a year's salary to make sure that so to say that the community that he created, whether he was toxic or not, didn't exemplify the gospel and how we should be taking care of each other. Difficult for me to say it happens without Mark Driscoll. And it's also like that situation happened where they have to give this guy money, or they need to raise the money because Driscoll was a dick.
Yeah.
But the fact is, would those people ever have come together? Doubt it. Like, would they have ever known each other without Driscoll starting this church? Doubt it.
Yeah.
And these churches are now, I think there's 9 subsequently. I think he had 11 campuses or 13 campuses when the thing ended. I think they had already had to close 2. It went to 11 because they had lost so much membership from all of the drama. And the other thing to say is, like, I don't know if this is true or not, but like, he's like, we had helicopters, like news helicopters flying over our house. My sons are throwing rocks at these helicopters. And like his son apparently like grabbed his BB gun and he's like, I'm going to go wait outside on the porch overnight just to protect the family. I'm like, I appreciate your kid's spirit, but maybe you screwed him up a little bit. But that's his reaction to news helicopters, But and I also know that in the city of Seattle, being very progressive, some of the people, like everybody lost their job, and I think he said at one point, the media team was 60 people. That's a huge media team. And like one of them went to try and get a job they didn't say the name of the company, but I'm going to guess it's Microsoft. And he put MH Music because he didn't want to say Mars Hill. And he's like, and the interviewer asks this candidate, does that mean Mars Hill Music? And the candidate goes, yes. And the guy just said, you can leave now, or just, he didn't get the job because of that.
Wow.
So I can understand how people are walking away from this, like, still carrying grief and they're unhappy about it. What's that?
And not coming back. I'm sure there are plenty of people walked away from church and walked away from faith altogether.
And, in the first episode, I said, if there's one thing that pisses me off, it's people who quit church for stupid reasons, or they quit faith for dumb reasons. The number one dumb reason to quit is because of a pastor or a church that hurt you. Now, here's what I'm going to say. That part sucks. I'm not saying that's cool. I'm not excusing the behavior. I'm not saying it's fine. I'm just saying, if you want to do anything in this life with a community, you have to accept the risk that somebody's going to be a dick to you and they're going to hurt you. And here's what I also will say is, like, I don't think that where the hurt is coming from is simply because of his actions. I think it's because they knew a Mark Driscoll that was the kind of man who would drop everything to go help a single mother, who would make sure that there was a woman who was getting beat by her husband and he would go talk to him or whatever, or maybe he brawled with him. I don't know. I hope he did. If I found out someone at my church was beating on his wife and a couple of guys are like, let's go tune him up, I'd be like, I'm so excited. Finally, a war. So they knew that, and they felt betrayed by the man that said you're an apostate, and and then disfellowship them and said nobody from within the church talked to this person. And you can understand if you're somewhere for a decade, like I've lived in a 15-mile square radius basically my whole life, and I'm getting ready to leave. This is my whole universe is here. You know what I'm saying? I've known all these people for my whole life. Yeah. So I can grasp that. And to those people, let me just say, as someone who's been made to feel, or to quote the great philosopher Curtis Jackson, also known as 50 Cent, I'm sorry. I'm sorry you think I made you feel that way. I think you quoted that to me once.
I'm sorry you think I made you feel that way.
The people who in church, staff at churches, who behave like this, who are dicks to people, their head is thinking, hey man, we're on a mission and you're getting in the way of that with your questions and your thoughts and your feelings and your jokes. And it's a circular problem, because what's the mission? What are we doing here? Spreading the gospel so that people can know that Jesus loves them, has a plan for their life, that our existence has a meaning and a purpose, and that is to commune with our Creator. And that, hey, just throwing this out there, your Creator loves you and delights in you. I remember someone telling me that once. They were prophesying over me, and they just grabbed me in church, grabbed my arm, and said, God wants you to know that he delights in you. I'm like, okay, God also knows what I'm going to do right after the service, so let's take it easy there, okay? But
I think, if the problem that I see with these big megachurch scandals, and there's plenty more we're going to talk about, is that people attach to a vision that it's the leader's vision. If you're going to attach to a vision, it's got to be just kind of the gospel, bare bones. If you attach to some individual's vision and he or she is rallying the entire congregation around, don't make a face when I say she, we're going to get into a scandal that was a she was a big part of that, because people believed in her vision. If you're believing in this individual's vision, I think you're setting yourself up to get hurt. I mean, because people are just people. It doesn't matter if they're pastors or not. I was doing some service work with a church back in Memphis, and I asked this guy, how he got involved. And he said, well, I just really believe in so-and-so, the main guy's vision. So I left this city I used to live in and moved up here with my wife. And I'm like, this guy's life is going to suck in about who knows when. But it just... You got to be careful if you're buying into what someone else believes in, especially in a religious or spiritual community. You got to be careful.
Yeah, and there's that verse in the Bible about guarding your heart. There's a verses in the Bible about how some ministers are not, they're preaching for their own ends, and that's what I would say. Like this is the part that I understand the sociopathic tendencies, and let me just say this.
You for sure do.
Yeah. As someone who might, anyways, I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to proclaim that over my life. But what I will say is, if you really want power, if you truly want to be a sociopathic leader, and you really want to just get people to follow you, the best way to do that is to own up to your mistakes, take responsibility for your bad actions, and go as far as to take responsibility for the consequences, the downstream consequences of your bad actions that led somebody else to aggrieve someone else. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's how you really get the power. Because one thing I realized is when I really wanted when I went into a church, or I start joining a community or whatever, and I'm just open about my nonsense and my BS. I'm just like, yeah, I like this, and like I don't like, like you guys have a stock of Latinas here, so that's why I'm coming to your church, right? I'm unapologetic about it, and
I've heard you tell pastors that you sell drugs to children for a living.
I've done that before. I can't like I can't like if you can take ownership of that, people, it just doesn't, their criticisms of you, people's criticisms won't stick to you because they go, he might be
apologized. Yep.
It's not just that. People will go, yes, he is a dick, and he did tell somebody that he sells drugs to children, and he did make a reference to, like, we know somebody who runs a nonprofit for for human trafficking. It's a sincere problem, and I love that that person is doing that.
Yeah.
And one time I saw him, and he was explaining to someone his ministry, and I said, I'm on the other side of that transaction. And of course, that person I'm talking about is a lovely person, but has no sense of humor when I make those kinds of jokes. Because I'm not being serious, right? There is not anybody, Christian or otherwise, who was like, oh, this is a good idea. Like, even the guys shoving a bunch of Chinese people into a shipping container isn't like, this is good. This is healthy they know what they're doing is wrong and bad, but they're doing it anyway.
Right. So good. We're going to end on the human trafficking note.
No, let me just, there's just one other thing I want to conclude with, is that, there's one of my favorite shows is a HBO show called Silicon Valley. And, this whole, don't ever watch it, it's evil. This whole series, it's 6 seasons. It starts with this guy wanting to build a product, and it ends with launch day. All the ups and downs they go to, and they're finally going to launch the product. And he realized what he's built is evil for one reason or another. And he goes, not only can we not launch this product, we have to launch the product, but the launch has to be flaming out. Like, we have to butcher this so that nobody goes back to this idea and tries to build it, because they're going to draw the same conclusions that we did, and they're going to end up building this evil product. And I look at Mars Hill and Mark Driscoll, and I go, like, there's so many lessons here. There is an incalculable human toll. There's a lot of people dead behind the Mars Hill bus.
Yeah.
But there's also infinitely more people who heard the gospel because of this. And I'll say this about the church that we planted. There are people there who would have never gone to that, who would have never walked into a church.
That's true.
If it wasn't a church preaching this progressive weirdness stuff that I found gross and detestable and leftover.
Yeah.
And just in closing, I do want to say one thing. We talked about that in the last episode, and I didn't, and I hope I said it then, but I left without telling anybody I was leaving, and Brett stayed, and we were still roommates. So people started asking Brett, and I felt horrible that you ended up being the, like.
And I used to say, I'm an individual.
Yeah. What are we,
we're
twins?
not all together.
Yeah. You're like 6'2". I'm barely 5'8". So, like, we're two different people. But hey, just this last thing, and then we're going to close in prayer. I just wanted to let you know, hey, Brett, you're canceled.
Danny, you're also canceled.